Hello, everyone. I'm Sergio Maldonado, and this is Masters of Privacy, a set of interviews covering the intersection of marketing, data, privacy, and technology, with a clear goal in mind, which is redefining the relationship between people, brands, and media around transparency and control. Which is to say, we're aiming for real customer centricity, or if you will, human centricity. We regularly talk to DPOs, CMOs, CDOs, and whoever else we find interesting and able to share valuable insights. So we hope you like it. Please do reach out if you have any ideas on future topics or speakers. Okay, we have Radha Gohil here today. She is a data governance and privacy leader at Shell, but she works on the marketing side. So she works on ad tech and martech data flows, as well as digital and programmatic supply chains, basically applying privacy by design principles or privacy compliance requirements to marketing related practices. This includes consent management, of course, and in general acting as a bridge between marketing, IT, CDO or Chief Digital Officer, and legal. On top of that, Radha chairs the Digital Governance Steering Group at the ISBA, that's the Incorporated Society of British Advertisers. She has previously worked at PwC and The Telegraph, all of it in the UK. With Radha, we're going to discuss the manner in which marketing teams navigate privacy compliance or even leverage a privacy first approach as a competitive advantage. This includes dealing with transparency requirements or the difficult trade offs involved in gathering proper consent when required to do so. Let's get on with it. Radha, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Sergio. Thank you for having me on your podcast today.
Really good to have you. So, to start somewhere, you've got a job that, from everyone's point of view, has become more difficult because of privacy. What was hard? What became harder?
Sergio, great question. And I think there's many things that have become harder with the influx of privacy regulations, but also the increase in customer expectations and understanding of how companies should be protecting their personal data. So when it comes to the digital ecosystem, there's many tools and technologies being used, both in the collection and processing of data that now requires additional elements to consider as a business. And then obviously atrocities like the Cambridge Analytica scandal in 2018 highlighted the importance of, being transparent as a company and educating consumers along the way about exactly what is happening to their data and what it means for them. And worldwide, consumers are, savvying up to this and becoming more aware. Obviously, there's different variations of how these legislations are enacted in different jurisdictions. But on the whole, companies have to think about what is the right thing to do, regardless of what the privacy legislation is saying. So for a company, the things that are becoming harder are, how do we ensure that we are implementing data limitation and only collecting what we really need and communicating why we need that and what the benefit to the consumer is going to be. Robust consent management, so we can, demonstrate to regulators that we are gathering the consent as required in order to action the activities we want to with the data. We need to be mindful about the compliance costs as well. So obviously enacting some of these changes internally costs us money, but the repercussions of not doing so are much greater. And educating our internal folk about the fact that these changes internally that are required aren't there to inhibit innovation. It will enable innovation, but within the safer boundaries.
Is there a sweet spot between privacy compliance and marketing outcomes?
That is the age-old battle, and I think it's the conversation where marketeers and legal, spend most of our time trying to really establish what that sweet spot is. It's not an easy place to arrive on, but it's definitely doable. But I think a lot of brands are navigating this space for the first time and figuring out what their specific sweet spot is. And I think in some cases that could be maybe quite brand specific. But I think communication is important both between the marketing teams and legal, because legal obviously hold the expertise about what the legislation is saying, but the marketeers know how that translates to successful customer outcomes and giving that customer experience our customers are requiring. So it's educating both our legal teams to say, okay, this is the law that we know we have to abide by, but this is how we need to translate it to our customers. Is this viable? And then from the other side of the coin, explaining to our customers why we're implementing certain things and making sure that they are understanding what it is we're trying to do so that they are not blindsided either, because it's an education piece for all sides of the coin, but in different kind of language.
So when it comes to language and transparency, if we could focus on consent management, for example, right? You want to make it very clear that you're gathering consent to, for example, improve the experience, or you want to present the business case in terms of value for the consumer. How have you approached that? Because I'll tell you, I look at the consent banner that you have, so in the UK, and yes, finally I see a proper question, right? Where I can reject easily. That's not so common these days, right? I know there's going to be some enforcement happening. It's coming up in the UK. It's been announced and confirmed by Mr. Edwards. But the question is, how is your perception of that? How did you tackle that? Because every marketer I speak to fears adopting a reject all on first layer, because of course consent rates are going to drop. What was your approach? How was that internal debate, or whatever you can share about it?
The debate really was, what are we allowed to do and what is really best for our customers? And look, we kind of took an analytical approach there, looking at the analytics of where the customer already was more inclined to accept or reject. And we saw that actually the numbers were supporting giving the equal opportunity. Now, I do understand a marketer's fears about giving the customer the opportunity to accept or reject. But at the end of the day, that's going to have to be the case regardless at some point in time. So the earlier we adopt, the earlier we can start taking learnings and testing different approaches, both in the tooling and the technology we use. It will better equip us for the time where it is enforced and mandated. So I think it's just really the best thing to do. Yes, it's painful, and there's obviously going to be conflicts of interest, but we just have to balance. What are the risks, what are the pitfalls, and what are the learnings as well.
I think the key sort of moment of truth is realizing that if you need to rely on consent, the path doesn't look too promising, because in the end, proper valid consent, when it's really clearly presented, I find it hard to believe that most people, when they do not see, if I could say no and there's no detriment, why would they say yes to something I don't understand? And if I understand it, it's simple enough that it doesn't bring that much value in terms of, third-party data sharing and so on. So these days, the best things you can do are those that do not require consent, because they deal with aggregate data, anonymous data, or because without that data, you couldn't provide a specific feature.
That's definitely the aim, and that would be amazing. But I think there are other ways as well to encourage customers to, see value in, providing their consent. That probably is a longer journey, but it's about making sure that the customer trusts their experiences with you, even when they haven't provided their consent, the non-consented version. They're understanding the brand, the value proposition, and we're giving them the experience they want. And over the course of time interacting with us, they might decide, oh, actually, I am happy to give consent for this, or this. So it's about building a relationship with that customer, not expecting them to consent straight away, but knowing that they have the option to change their mind in the future if they wish.
Something I've heard is, and I like this idea as well, sort of halfway, is the idea of progressive consent. In the end, I insist on consent because it's your primary point of interaction with the consumer before you start collecting data, which in the end you need to measure campaigns, to know what's going on. Again, hopefully not based on consent, but you need the data That's my point. So I have the idea of, and I really like this idea of collecting data progressively only as you need it, instead of all of it at once at the outset. Have you heard of that or ever pondered this idea of progressive consent?
Yeah, I've definitely heard of it. And actually, that really resonates. And I think that's a great way to educate the consumer as they're going along the journey with the brand as well, because uh, they might not understand why all of this data is required. And so their initial response will be no. But as they're interacting and they see, oh, actually, if I provide this now, I'll be able to do this. Not as a, if you don't say yes, you can't do it, but helping them understand why sharing that data will broaden their experience. It might increase adoption rates going forward. And I think they're probably going to be more willing to provide that data when they have that trust in the brand to begin with.
Very good. So, speaking of a brand, let's land on the brand. At Shell, how do you keep it consistent, right? So there's an ethical approach to protecting people's privacy in the same manner as there's an ethical approach to AI, but it has to be coupled with the protection of the environment. And at Shell, you are there, in the eye of the storm. So let me ask you that first to get it out of the way. Do you see that consistency? Do you believe that, or do you see yourself that sort of consistent approach to both slowly abandoning fossil fuels and at the same time protecting these other values?
Sure. I mean, this is a very interesting question. And absolutely for me, working at Shell resonates both from a personal point of view and with the work that I'm doing. I think when it comes to consent management and data privacy, going down the ethical route is definitely the best thing to do. And I definitely see that approach within Shell. Equally, as a company, our manifestos and strategies are very much aligned to doing what's right for the country and the environment as well. So I think they both couple very well together and working symbiotically, which keeps me motivated in role, to be honest.
So then how does this help, this whole approach to privacy, being more transparent and asking properly, all the things that you're doing already, how do they help you differentiate your brand, if they do at all?
To be honest, I think this is something all brands should be doing, and all brands are probably doing, but at different rates and degrees of that journey. But I feel as an industry within marketing, this is something that's going to be expected by consumers across all brands. I'm obviously looking at it as a marketer lens, but equally, I am a consumer of brands as well. So I always try and use the lens of, this is what we're trying to implement. Is this what I would expect to be receiving as a customer? Is this something I would be happy with? Because I think you really got to put yourself in a customer's shoes. And, at the end of the day, we're all customers of one brand or another. It might not be Shell, it might be something else. But I think when implementing marketing strategies, you really have to think, is this the right thing to do, both internally from a, implementation perspective, but from an ethical perspective, would you want to be on the receiving end of this as well? So I definitely think it's a brand differentiator. But I do think all brands are thinking along this lens as well, at different rates.
So, Radha, have you put together a system on your end to navigate privacy compliance in a more efficient manner and independently from your DPOs or your legal teams? Have you done anything yourself on your end, on the marketing side?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's so important for brands and, everyone to be strengthening their governance within the marketing teams because, ultimately the marketers understand the technologies they're working within. Yes, they leverage their expertise from the legal teams, but when it comes to the day-to-day workings, you need to have the governance sitting in the team. So, the first thing we're doing really is strengthening the governance arm. And what that really means is, what tools are we using for consent? How are we trying to articulate across markets? How are we trying to look at our cookie compliance and things like that and activities like that? So we're trying to embed that specialism within the team, build greater awareness of the importance and the requirements and the reasons why. And that ultimately is upskilling our marketing professionals that are not governance specific, but understanding that when they're innovating, what elements maybe do they need to consider more in depth than maybe they would have had to previously. And how do those legal requirements overlay and help to innovate at a faster rate whilst balancing the risks across the separate teams?
Let me drill down on a couple of concepts that I think are there. One of them is training, because now you are propagating the culture of privacy, and that's fantastic that it happens within marketing. So awareness. In my experience, whenever teams that are not specifically the legal team are trained in privacy by design or any of these baked in privacy engineering, if it's a technical team, the whole company gains a lot, because you don't have to explain things, chase people around after the fact. People are really proactive rather than reactive. So in marketing, do you have some sort of standard training, or have you done any of that, if I can ask you, on privacy, or how do you propagate the culture of privacy?
So I think you touched on that just now. And I think when it comes to privacy and thinking about privacy, it's a cultural shift. Often when you deliver trainings, it's very much mandatory. So you quickly do the training and then you kind of bookshelf it and don't think about it thereafter. So the way we're trying to approach it at Shell is we're trying to make it that, when you're doing a new activity or you're looking to innovate, you include the governance arm to begin with during the discovery phase, so that you have really thought about the risks and pitfalls prior to designing the solution. Because if you get governance or privacy involved at that stage, you can maybe feel that the requirements are then an inhibitor to the innovation. So the cultural shift we're really hoping for here and we're working on is including the strategic arm of governance and privacy at the forefront, which is obviously a foundational pillar of privacy by design and privacy marketing, but isn't always thought of on the ground when you're doing it, because it's something that people don't really want to think about because they don't want the blockers. But we've found that actually we're experiencing less blockers by getting involved at the beginning, because we're able to really unpick some of those pain points before they've even begun.
Very good. Last question. So also from your answer here, the other thing that comes to mind is suppliers in marketing. You have much more risk in marketing when it comes to third parties than anybody else in my experience. Well, of course, there's human resources with more delicate data, of course, with even health data, but you've got so many tiny little suppliers, right? Showing up on your website through pixels, measurement, DMPs, CDPs, all sorts of platforms. And marketing is sort of the first line of defense whenever someone wants to sell something to you. Up to now, first you would be super happy to buy it, and then it would go to procurement. Procurement may raise the flag and say, bring the DPO. I want to know how these people are going to comply. Where do they store data? Do they send it over? Whatever. Do you now, through this new culture, also do your own sort of do you apply a first level of scrutiny on third parties in the marketing technology space?
Definitely. And third parties are humongously, beneficial to us as marketers, but equally can pose a great risk as well. And I think it's really important when choosing third parties to do a lot of thorough analyses of, their data sharing and storing practices, because inherently, if we are looking to engage with them, we have to be comfortable with the way that they're operating on our behalf, even though we're communicating to our customer that a third party is, executing certain tasks. At the end of the day, the reputational damage would be at the main brand. So we try to limit the number of third parties we're working with and really drill down into the business case of why this third party is required. But equally looking at the third parties we're currently engaged with across all of our, technology stack to really determine if, the value we're getting from them is still what it used to be.
Radha, thank you very much.
Very welcome, Sergio. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Okay, that's all for today. Please follow the Masters of Privacy channel on LinkedIn if you want to find some interview transcripts, cheat sheets, and other useful resources and surprises every now and then. On top of that, episode notes and other feeds are available on mastersofprivacy.com. Thank you for listening.